Back in 2017, there was a 21-year-old woman who found herself in a really difficult place in life. She felt completely stuck. She had dropped out of college during her very first year, which was a huge reason why her relationship with her parents had fallen apart. In fact, she had basically zero communication with her mother, her father, or her sister. She only had a small handful of close friends she could actually trust, and she was working a dead-end job at a local vape shop, standing behind a counter all day for minimum wage. She would later look back on this period of her life and call it her attitude era, a time when she was just angry at the world, lost, and desperate for any kind of escape from her current reality. One afternoon, while she was sitting behind the counter at the vape shop, she decided to scroll through Craigslist on her phone to pass the time. That was when she saw an advertisement that immediately caught her eye. It was posted by a guy named Jackson, and he was advertising free lodging in his house for a girl who would watch over his place and keep it clean. Essentially, he was looking for an au pair or a housekeeper, but without any kids to watch. The post had about 10 different pictures of the house. It looked like a modest, middle-class home. It was slightly old-fashioned, but she actually liked that style. However, the pictures were not what grabbed her attention the most. It was the fact that he was offering a completely free place to live in exchange for basic housekeeping duties. On top of that, the ad explicitly stated that no background check was required. Without even asking her friends or family for their opinion, she decided to reply to the post. She was not on speaking terms with her parents anyway, so she did not feel the need to consult anyone. She sent a text message to the number listed in the ad, and Jackson responded within just a few minutes. She expressed her interest and asked some basic questions about the living arrangement. Jackson had a perfectly reasonable answer for everything, which only made her more interested. But then, very early in the text conversation, he asked her what her gender was. When she replied that she was female, she noticed that his responses suddenly became much longer and more detailed. At the time, she did not really care. She figured most people simply preferred having a female housekeeper because they assumed females were cleaner or more trustworthy. She was just desperate to get out of her parents' house. Jackson explained that he would be away at work during the day, but he wanted to come home to a clean house, and he also would appreciate a cooked meal from time to time. She was completely fine with that. Cooking a meal every now and then seemed like a small price to pay for free rent. It was certainly better than working long hours at the vape shop. Plus, Jackson said he would pay for all the groceries. It sounded almost too good to be true. He suggested she come by later that day to look at the place, and she agreed. A few hours later, she was driving her old, beat-up Honda Civic to his house. It was located in a completely normal, peaceful neighborhood. The surrounding houses had beautiful flower gardens and neat decorations, which made her feel like the neighbors were normal, decent people. She parked her car, walked up the concrete path, and rang the doorbell. When the door opened, she was surprised to see a man who was much older and larger than she had pictured. She had imagined a standard 45-year-old dad type. Instead, the man standing before her was around 60 years old, at least 6 feet tall, with a thick gray beard, and he was quite overweight. Despite his intimidating size, he greeted her with a huge smile and immediately went in for a warm hug, even though they had just met. He laughed a lot during their greeting, which quickly put her at ease. He began showing her around the 2-story house. The first floor was a basic layout with a kitchen, a dining room, and a living room. Then they went upstairs, where there were 4 bedrooms and a single bathroom. He only opened the door to the guest room she would be using and the bathroom. The other bedroom doors remained closed. He pointed to one of the closed doors across the hall and told her it was his office, and she was welcome to use it if she ever needed to. Further down the hall was his master bedroom, and there was one more room that he did not explain at all. She was a bit surprised to learn that they would be sharing only one bathroom, but she did not want to complain. Next, he took her down to the basement. He explained that it was unfinished, and that he only used it for doing laundry and working out. That was the end of the tour. He did not show her the backyard that day. She told him she wanted the job, and he immediately told her she was hired. 2 days later, she returned to the house with all of her belongings packed into her car. When her parents asked where she was going, She simply told them she had found an apartment, without giving any further details. Her first night at the house was when she noticed the cameras. They were not hidden, or at least, she did not think they were meant to be. They were just small black security cameras mounted up in the corners of the living room and the kitchen. At first, she rationalized it. She was a complete stranger moving into his house, so it made perfect sense that he would want some security to protect his property. Still, she wished he had mentioned them beforehand. It was the very first time she felt a slight wave of uneasiness, but she brushed it off because she really wanted this living situation to work out. That night, as she lay in bed, she realized how noisy the house was. When they had toured it during the day, it had seemed perfectly quiet. But in the silence of the night, she could hear the old wood floors creaking downstairs. At one point, around 1:30 in the morning, she heard what sounded like a door closing somewhere on the first floor. Once again, she forced herself to find a logical explanation. She told herself that when you are trying to sleep in a strange new place, you notice every single little sound, and old houses always make creaking noises as the temperature changes. The next morning, Jackson was already gone by the time she woke up, just as he had promised. He had left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter with a list of chores. It was all very standard stuff. He wanted her to wash his laundry, vacuum the carpets, and wipe down the kitchen counters. She tried to focus on the positive side of things. She was no longer standing behind a vape counter all day. She did his laundry first, then cleaned the floors and wiped down the kitchen. After finishing her chores, she went upstairs to make her bedroom feel more like home. She unpacked her clothes, set up her laptop on a small desk, and placed a few personal items around the room. She remembers thinking that this might actually work out. She felt a sense of peace that she had not felt in a long time. There were no parents yelling downstairs, and no one was bursting into her room to scream orders at her. The first week went by without any major issues. When Jackson came home at night, they would chat briefly about basic things. He would ask about her childhood, what she wanted to do in the future, and how her day was. She cooked dinner for him a few nights in a row, and he seemed to really appreciate it. She started to think she had completely overreacted about the security cameras and the nighttime noises, but things did not stay peaceful for long. One night, she decided to make a meal of chicken pasta with vegetables. She was not a professional chef, just a young, slightly rebellious girl trying her best. When Jackson came home, he looked visibly exhausted and irritated. He sat down, took a single bite of the food, and his entire expression changed. He looked disgusted. He told her the food tasted completely bland. She immediately apologized and offered to add some seasoning or cook something else. But Jackson suddenly snapped. He raised his voice and told her that if she was going to live in his house for free, the least she could do was learn how to cook something edible. He aggressively pushed the plate away, stood up, and told her to clean up the mess she had made in his kitchen before walking away to his bedroom. She was completely caught off guard. It was not just the harsh words that scared her, but how quickly his personality had shifted from warm and friendly to cold and angry. She quietly cleaned up the kitchen and hoped that he had just had a really bad day at work. The next morning, she decided to apologize to him again to keep the peace, even though she did not think she had done anything terribly wrong. She told him she was sorry about the dinner and promised to try harder. Jackson just laughed it off as if it were nothing, but then he said something that made her blood run cold. He smiled and said that maybe she could make it up to him by cleaning the house in her underwear that day. He said it with a grin, pretending it was just a joke. She froze. She did not know how to respond. She kept her voice calm and told him she was not comfortable with that. He laughed again, told her to relax because he was only kidding, and then went to his room. She stood there alone in the kitchen, feeling deeply unsettled. This was the first time she realized that something was seriously wrong with this man. She immediately texted one of her close friends and explained what had happened. Her friend texted back instantly, telling her she was completely insane for staying there and urging her to pack her things and leave immediately. But she did not want to leave. As weird as things were getting, she still felt like she had more control over her life here than she would if she moved back in with her parents. To her, going back home felt like admitting defeat. The following Monday, She was driving Jackson's car to the grocery store using some cash he had left for her. As she was driving down a quiet street, a car behind her started honking its horn repeatedly. She assumed she had made a driving mistake, but the car continued to follow her closely. Fearing that something was wrong with the car, or that she was being targeted, she pulled over to the side of the road. The car pulled up right behind her, and a young woman about her own age got out. The woman walked up to her window and asked if she was currently living at Jackson's house. When she said yes, the woman's face became incredibly serious. She told her that she needed to pack her things and get away from that man immediately. She explained that Jackson was not even his real name. She said she was the girl who had held the exact same housekeeping position right before her. She told her that she eventually discovered Jackson had hidden cameras watching her every move. She started noticing that he knew things about her personal life that she had never told him. When she finally tried to move out, Jackson made it incredibly difficult, constantly questioning where she was going, who she was meeting, and when she would be back. Then the girl shared the most terrifying detail. She said that one night, she woke up in the middle of the night and saw Jackson standing inside her dark bedroom, just watching her sleep. The young woman felt physically sick hearing this. The girl then told her that Jackson did not actually have a job. He lied about going to work every day, and she eventually realized that he was secretly hiding somewhere inside the house during the day, watching her through the cameras. The young woman sat in her car, her mind racing as every single strange occurrence suddenly made perfect sense. She asked the girl how she could leave without causing a dangerous confrontation. The girl advised her to act completely normal, to start secretly moving her most important belongings out of the house, one small bag at a time so he would not notice, and to make her final departure look like a simple errand. She warned her never to confront him or let him know that she knew the truth. When she returned to the house, the atmosphere felt completely different. She felt an overwhelming sense of paranoia, as if eyes were watching her from every corner. That night, she decided to search her bedroom carefully, just as the girl had suggested. After a few minutes of searching, she looked on the top shelf of her closet. Pushed far into the dark corner, behind a cardboard box, she spotted it. It was a tiny black camera lens, pointing directly at her bed through a small hole that had been drilled into the wall. She felt a wave of sheer terror, but she forced herself to slowly put the box back in place, pretending she had not seen anything. She did not sleep at all that night. She lay wide awake in the pitch-black room, staring at the ceiling, terrified of what might happen. And she was incredibly glad she stayed awake, because at some point in the dead of night, she heard the faint creak of her bedroom door opening. She quickly rolled onto her side and looked toward the doorway. There, standing in the dim light of the hallway, was Jackson. When he realized she was awake and staring directly at him, he quickly apologized, claiming he had just wanted to check on her, and closed the door. She lay there shaking, wondering what he had been planning to do if she had been fast asleep. The very next morning, she put her escape plan into action. Every single day when she left the house, she would carry one small, inconspicuous bag of her belongings and put it in the trunk of her car. 3 days later, while he was supposedly away at work, she packed the last of her things, got into her car, and drove away for good. Later that afternoon, Jackson sent her a text message asking where she was. She replied, telling him that she had decided to move back in with her parents, and thanked him for the opportunity. He kept texting her, demanding to know why she had left so suddenly, and telling her that she at least owed him an in-person conversation to explain herself. She never replied. About a week later, she received an email notification that made her heart sink. Someone had attempted to log into one of her old social media accounts. The security alert showed that the login attempt had originated from the exact town where Jackson's house was located. She immediately changed all of her passwords and security settings. She never found out what his ultimate intentions were, and she did not want to know. While nothing physically violent happened to her, she truly believes that if she had stayed in that house any longer, things would have ended terribly. Now, think about how much we trust people we hire to come into our homes. Our second story takes us to a young man who bought his very first house. It was a small 2-story home, but since he lived completely alone and worked incredibly long hours at his job, It was still far more space than he really needed. Because of his busy work schedule, he quickly started falling behind on keeping the place clean. No matter how many times he promised himself he would spend his weekend cleaning, he was always too exhausted to do it. One evening, while relaxing after a long shift, he was scrolling through local advertisements online and saw a listing for house cleaning services. The post was simple. It advertised an independent cleaner who worked for cash and offered a highly flexible schedule. He figured this was exactly what he needed to get his house back in order. He sent an email, and the woman responded the very next morning. She explained that she usually cleaned apartments, but she was perfectly fine cleaning a house. They agreed on a day for her to come over while he was away at work. She asked a few standard questions, including how large the house was, if there were any pets, and who lived there. He casually told her that he had no pets and that he lived completely alone. Looking back, he deeply regretted sharing that detail so easily. On the scheduled Thursday, she arrived at his house. He met her briefly at the door before he had to leave for work. He had already taken the precaution of hiding his valuables in his bedroom closet, which had a lock on the door. The cleaner appeared to be a quiet woman, about 38 years old. She avoided making eye contact with him, but he simply assumed she was shy. He gave her a quick tour of the house, showing her all the rooms upstairs and downstairs that needed cleaning. He explicitly told her that she did not need to enter his home office. He showed her where the cleaning supplies were kept in the laundry room, and she asked if she could start coming regularly every 2 weeks. He told her he wanted to see how the first cleaning went before committing to a schedule. Before he walked out the door, she asked him what time he usually returned home from work. He told her he usually got back around 6 or 7 in the evening, depending on traffic. At the time, the question did not seem strange to him. When he returned home that evening, he was highly impressed. The floors were spotless, the kitchen counters were gleaming, and the entire house smelled fresh and clean. He paid her the agreed cash amount, and she left. Everything seemed perfect. But about 6 days later, things began to take a strange turn. He woke up in the middle of the night, around 2 or 3 in the morning. He was naturally a light sleeper, so waking up was not unusual for him. But as he lay in bed, he heard a faint, dull thump coming from downstairs. It was a soft sound, and he easily convinced himself that it was just the house settling or some other normal nighttime noise. He ignored it and went back to sleep. A few nights later, he woke up again. This time, he heard a distinct sound that sounded exactly like a kitchen cabinet door gently swinging shut. Once again, he told himself he was just half asleep and imagining things. He was too afraid to go downstairs in the dark at 3 in the morning, so he stayed in bed. Over the next week, he began to notice small, unusual details around the house during the day. One morning, he walked into the kitchen and noticed that one of the upper cabinet doors was open by a few inches. He assumed he must have left it open himself. A few days later, he noticed that one of the dining room chairs had been pulled out slightly from the table. Again, he shrugged it off, assuming he had done it without thinking. Then, on a Saturday morning, he went into the downstairs bathroom and realized that the hand towel hanging on the ring was damp, even though he had not used that bathroom since the previous day. These were all incredibly small things, the kind of details that are easy to explain away if you are actively trying not to panic. But the nighttime noises continued to happen. Sometimes he would hear a soft, slow creak that sounded like a footstep on the floorboards downstairs. But he would always convince himself that the wood was just expanding and contracting. Eventually, he started shutting his bedroom door completely at night, instead of leaving it cracked open like he normally did. He did not want to admit to himself that he was becoming paranoid, but deep down, he was terrified. One night, he woke up to the sound of movement directly outside his bedroom door, as if someone was slowly shifting their weight on the floorboards. He lay frozen in his bed, staring intensely at the doorknob, waiting to see if it would start to turn. Nothing happened, and he eventually fell back into a restless sleep. The next morning, he felt ridiculous for being so scared. He searched the house, and everything looked completely normal. Around this time, he contacted the cleaning lady again to schedule a second cleaning, since she had done such a wonderful job the first time. He figured his paranoia was just due to work stress. She came over on a weekday while he was at work, using the back door key he had left unlocked for her. When he got home, the house was clean once again. She asked if he wanted to set up a regular monthly cleaning, and he agreed. About a week after this second cleaning, he noticed that his food was disappearing much faster than usual. One night he could have sworn there was still 1 cup of yogurt left in the refrigerator. But when he checked the next morning, it was gone. The loaf of bread on the counter also seemed to be missing several slices. He tried to convince himself that he was just eating more than he realized. But then, he found a clean drinking glass sitting in the kitchen sink that he was absolutely certain he had not used. Since he lived completely alone and had not had any guests over, there was no logical explanation for how that glass got there. He actually started Googling symptoms of sleepwalking, wondering if he was losing his mind and eating in his sleep. Everything changed a few nights later. He woke up to the unmistakable sound of slow, heavy steps walking across the hardwood floor downstairs. This was not the sound of a house settling. These were footsteps. He quietly grabbed his phone from his nightstand and listened intently. After about 10 seconds of silence, he heard a soft bump, as if someone had accidentally brushed against a wall in the dark downstairs. He was too terrified to go down there. He knew some people might think he was a coward, but in moments of extreme fear, your body can completely freeze up. He lay in bed for 30 minutes, his heart pounding, listening to the silence. The next morning, he checked every single window and door in the house. Every single one of them was locked tight. He even gathered the courage to search the basement, but it was completely empty. A few days later, he went to get something from his kitchen junk drawer, where he kept spare keys, batteries, and menus. He kept a small key ring in that drawer, with 2 spare house keys on it. When he picked up the ring, he realized that one of the spare keys was missing. A cold chill ran down his spine. The cleaning lady had been left entirely alone in his house twice, for several hours each time. He realized she must have stolen the spare key. From that night on, he started locking his bedroom door from the inside before going to sleep. He decided he needed to know the truth. He came up with a plan to test his theory. The next morning, he got dressed for work, walked out the front door, and drove away in his car just like he did every single day. But after driving a few blocks, he took a detour, circled back, and parked his car on the next street over where it could not be seen from his house. He quietly walked back to his property, slipped inside through the back door, and crept upstairs to wait in silence. Around 11:30 in the morning, he heard a sound that made his stomach drop. It was the distinct sound of his front door lock turning, followed by the door creaking open. He heard soft footsteps stepping into the entryway. He crept over to the wooden stair railing and looked down through the gaps. He saw a woman walking into his living room. She was wearing casual clothes and did not have any cleaning supplies with her. She walked straight into the kitchen, opened his refrigerator, took out a drink, and sat down at his dining room table. She sat there in complete silence for a few minutes, slowly sipping the drink. Then, she stood up and began walking slowly around his living room, examining his personal belongings. She picked up a framed photograph of him and his brother that was sitting on a shelf and just stared at it for a long time. Suddenly, she turned and started walking toward the stairs. He panicked. He quietly backed away from the railing, rushed into his bedroom, and gently closed the door, making sure the latch did not make a sound. He did not know what to do. He was trapped in his own room. He heard her footsteps coming up the wooden stairs. They reached the top landing and then stopped. Through the gap at the bottom of his bedroom door, he could see her shadow block the light. She was standing directly outside his door. She stood there, completely still, for what felt like an eternity. With his heart racing and his adrenaline pumping, he decided he could not take the suspense anymore. He grabbed the doorknob, turned it, and flung the door open, prepared to confront his cleaning lady. But when the door swung open, he gasped. The woman standing mere inches from his face was not his cleaning lady. She was a different woman entirely. She had a similar build and appeared to be Hispanic, but her facial features, hair, and height were completely different. But the most terrifying thing about her was her expression. She did not look startled or embarrassed to have been caught. Instead, she stared directly into his eyes with a cold, blank, and incredibly hateful look. Neither of them said a single word. They just stood there in the hallway, staring at each other for several agonizing seconds. Then, without a word, the woman slowly turned around, walked back down the stairs, and exited through the front door. Closing it quietly behind her, he stood there shaking, physically unable to move or speak. Once he finally regained his composure, he called the police and explained the entire situation. He told them about the cleaning lady, the missing key, and the strange woman who had entered his home. The police attempted to contact the original cleaning lady using the phone number and email address he provided, but she had completely disconnected her phone and disappeared. That very afternoon, he went to the local hardware store, purchased new locks, and replaced every single lock on his doors. The police officer who took his report warned him that people who commit these types of crimes rarely work alone, and they often target empty houses of single people to find places to stay during the day. He never hired a cleaning service ever again. But the internet is full of traps, and sometimes the danger comes when you are the one looking to buy something. This takes us to our third story, which goes back to the year 2008. For those who are too young to remember, the internet back then was like the Wild West. Social media platforms like Facebook were just beginning to gain popularity, but most people were still using MySpace. We had all heard terrifying rumors about online scams, but back then, nobody really took them seriously. We were incredibly trusting, and many of us had a false sense of security, believing that nothing bad could ever happen to us. Perhaps the most popular website at the time was Craigslist. Before websites like online marketplaces existed, Craigslist was the absolute go-to place for buying and selling everything from cars and furniture to finding jobs and apartments. In the spring of 2008, a young man in his early 20s found his life falling apart. He had been living with his girlfriend, but she suddenly broke up with him and forced him to pack his things and leave. He did not have enough money on his $7 an hour salary to afford his own apartment, so he had to rely on his friends, crashing on their couches while he figured out his next move. One of his friends suggested he use Craigslist to find cheap furniture, so that whenever he finally secured his own apartment, he would have things to fill it with. His friend even offered to let him store any furniture he bought in his large garage. He started searching Craigslist, and he was amazed by the incredible deals he found. One afternoon, he came across a listing for a complete sectional sofa for only $45. The post was created by a guy named Keith. The listing included a picture of a beautiful, clean sectional sofa that appeared to be in excellent condition. The price seemed incredibly low, but he was young and naive, so he did not suspect anything. He messaged Keith through the site, and Keith replied almost immediately, stating that the couch was still available. Keith explained that he had just accepted a new job in another state, and was desperate to sell all of his furniture quickly, which was why the price was so low. The explanation sounded perfectly reasonable. They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to meet at Keith's house that evening to pick up the couch. He arrived at the address around 9 o'clock at night. Looking back, he realized that meeting a stranger at a dark house so late was a massive red flag, but at the time, Keith had told him he worked long hours and could not meet any earlier. The street was incredibly dark and run down, with almost no working streetlights. The house itself was completely blacked out, and the yard looked abandoned and overgrown. The neighboring houses were just as dark and decrepit. He sat in his car and tried calling Keith's phone, but he was shocked to receive an automated recording stating that the number was no longer in service. Just as he was about to put his car in reverse and drive away, his phone buzzed. It was an incoming call from a completely different phone number with a different area code. He answered, and a friendly but strange high-energy voice greeted him. The man, who introduced himself as Keith, apologized for the phone confusion. He claimed that he had dropped and broken his personal phone earlier that day, so he was calling from a temporary work phone. He felt a bit uneasy, but he was so determined to get the $45 sectional couch that he ignored his instincts. Keith told him to walk around to the back of the house, explaining that he would unlock the back door to let him in. He got out of his car and walked into the pitch-black backyard. There were no lights on anywhere. He stood near the back door, waiting in the darkness, unsure of what to do. He decided to call Keith back on the temporary work number, but instead of hearing the phone ring through his earpiece, he heard a loud, generic ringtone echoing from the thick bushes nearby in the backyard. For the very first time, he realized that something was horribly wrong. Suddenly, Keith emerged from the dark bushes, holding a glowing flip phone. In a frantic, overly cheerful voice, he apologized for scaring him. He claimed that he had been throwing away some old food in the bushes, and liked to feed the wild squirrels and animals that lived back there. He told Keith that it was fine, but he just wanted to see the couch so he could load it up and leave. Keith smiled, skipped past him, and approached the back door. He seemed to be struggling to open it. He got a closer look at Keith in the dim light. He was in his late 50s, extremely thin, with long, dirty white hair tied back in a messy ponytail. He also had a terrible, overpowering smell of stale cigarette smoke. Keith turned to him and asked if he could help him open the door. He claimed that the wooden door frame was warped and always got stuck, and he was too weak to force it open. He told him to put his shoulder against the door and push as hard as he could. Even though he knew this was incredibly suspicious, he felt pressured to just get it over with. He stepped up to the door, grabbed the doorknob, lowered his shoulder, and prepared to throw his weight against the wood. But the moment he pushed, the door was suddenly yanked open from the inside. Because he had put all of his momentum into the push, he completely lost his balance and fell face first onto the hard floor inside the pitch-black room. Before he could even comprehend what was happening, Keith screamed out a single word into the darkness. Now. Suddenly, two large men rushed out from the shadows on either side of the doorway and threw themselves onto him, pinning him to the ground. He began to thrash and struggle wildly, but one of the men holding him down was absolutely massive, making it impossible for him to break free. In the darkness, Keith began to viciously kick him in the face and chest. The sheer terror of being attacked in a pitch-black room by complete strangers was overwhelming. He felt his body growing weaker with every kick. Then, Keith turned to one of the men and told him to grab the tape. He heard the terrifying, distinct sound of heavy adhesive tape being ripped from a roll. He realized with absolute horror that they were planning to bind him. But then, a miracle happened. During the frantic struggle on the floor, his cell phone, which was in his pocket, had accidentally speed-dialed the friend he had been staying with. Through the speaker of his phone, which was lying on the floor nearby, he could hear his friend's voice loudly saying hello over and over again. He knew he had to act fast. He gathered all the air in his lungs and screamed out at the top of his voice, claiming that he was in the back of the house and telling his friend to come back there with the weapon immediately. It was a complete bluff. He was entirely alone, and his friend was miles away, but he hoped to convince his attackers that he had a friend waiting for him in his car. The trick worked. The large man holding him down hesitated and loosened his grip, looking toward Keith. That single second of hesitation was all he needed. He summoned every ounce of strength he had left, broke free from their grip, scrambled to his feet, and ran out the back door into the night. He did not look back. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, reached his car, threw himself inside, and locked the doors. As he turned the key in the ignition and slammed on the gas pedal, he looked out his window and saw the large, bald attacker with dark, lifeless eyes sprinting toward the car, reaching out to grab the door handle. He sped away, his tires screeching in the darkness. He drove aimlessly for hours, terrified that they might be following him, before finally returning to his friend's house. He called the police and reported the attack, but because the Craigslist ad had been deleted immediately, and the phone Keith used was a untraceable burner phone, the attackers were never identified or caught. He was left with the haunting realization that this was not a simple robbery. They did not ask for his wallet or his car keys. They had lured him to an abandoned house with a fake listing, prepared to bind him and do something far worse. These stories are a grim reminder that the internet can be a dangerous place, and when a deal or an opportunity seems too good to be true, it almost always is. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.